The word religion literally means that which connects people. That's what the word means. That's why I think it's a beautiful word. It should be retaken. It's nothing to do with believing in God. That's theism.
Hi, you're listening to Future Skills, the podcast that provides tools that prepare you for a future of accelerating change. I'm Karl-Mikael Syding. In this episode, I and Ludvig talk to the philosopher Alexander Bard. The topics are wide-ranging, but they all center around the human psyche. Among other things, Bard tells us his views on psychedelics, sex robots, matriarchy, religion, artificial intelligence, success, and how he researches and writes his books. This is the second and final part of our talk with Alexander Bard. In part 1, episode 6 of Future Skills, which was published on April 9, 2018, we talked about how to find the right collaborators and how to identify your best role in a given group. Today's episode kicks off with a discussion about the 5 giants of psychoanalysis and Bard's coming book, Digital Libido. After that, we discuss artificial intelligence, Sensocracy, sex robots, mentorship, and psychedelics. All right, here comes Alexander Bard.
Before, you were mentioning Freud and the civilization, its content, and that's a really powerful book.
Yeah, it is.
And I want to ask you, why do you think Freud's theories became so popular?
Oh, he was right. He was incredibly right about what he said. He had deep insight into the psychology of human beings. And he essentially constructed modern psychoanalysis first. And he's one of the 4 giants, I call it, well, you could say 5 giants of psychoanalysis, but he's one of them. And what he did when he got older, from the 1920s forward, is get much more interest in society as a whole. And he discovered that you can use the psychoanalytical method and apply it on society as a whole. We call it socioanalysis, not sociology, socioanalysis, which is the artistic, philosophical understanding of a society. And we're doing social analysis in our work, Söderqvist. Now, the new book, Digital Libido, is 100% social analysis. Like, look at the current world and the state we're in. How we socioanalytically describing this world, so we get the social analysis right. So we're looking at tribes and we're looking at human beings and groups, and then we could go down on the individual level of each human beings as well. But we prefer to stay on the social level because that's where the interesting thing happens. And that's where people are misinformed. So we just want to repeat what Freud did. He wrote a very enlightening book, and the people who did read that book in 1930, they could later build critical theory on that. The Frankfurt School in the 1940s, etc., was built on Freud. And we want to resurrect Freud because we think it's by being Freudian today, by asking ourselves, what would Sigmund Freud have said about our predicament today, that we can be really wise. We should also add that the history of psychoanalysis of the last 100 years has a couple of other, giants that are also very important and has slightly modified and deepened Freud's message. Jung is an obvious one. Jung is together with Nietzsche, the platform which Jordan Peterson builds his worldview. So Jung is incredibly useful, especially when it comes to tribal mapping and archetypes. Then comes Jacques Lacan. And Jacques Lacan was a huge French psychoanalyst from the 1950s forward who is incredibly important in modern social philosophy. You cannot do proper social philosophy unless you're a Lacanian first today. And there's a couple of other giants that come later, and they're still alive today, certainly still active. One of them is the leading female psychoanalyst of the 20th century, Julia Kristeva. She comes from Bulgaria originally, but she's lived her entire life in France. She's incredibly clever. And when it comes to adding a female perspective to this world, she actually turned around and twisted Freud, Jung, and Lacan quite a lot and did so very well. And you could also say that Slavoj Žižek is another one of these. He's a social analyst like me and Jan Söderqvist, but he's also a great theorist today.
Yeah, what I really like about the current paradigm, as I see it, is the fact that you can question things and hopefully not get crucified for it.
Well, if you're a real hero, though, you might get crucified for it. And I think strong people like Jordan Peterson, Slavoj Žižek, and I hope I belong to a category, are ready to be crucified for the truth. Meaning that if you're a real truth sayer, you completely disregard how people react to you saying it. You're saying it because you think it's the honest truth. You come to the conclusion, this is the truth, and I'm going to say it, and then people can do whatever they want with it. And if they want to kill me in the process, I'm still say it. Because only people who are ready to sacrifice themselves for truth in that sense will fight for free speech.
Do you actively want humanity to create strong artificial general intelligence?
I think they will. So I'm more interested in the fact they will rather than what I want. I'm not so interested in my own desires, actually. And I think I would diminishing myself as a philosopher. I would sit there and say, I would want this to happen, I would want that to happen. I think that's kind of trivial. And I think machine intelligence is already happening. It's happening on a large scale. Some things it cannot mimic humanity. In other ways, it beats humans already. So comparing machines and humans is not fair. We're going to live in a landscape where humans and machines interact constantly. But because machines can actually find each other and then combine their knowledge and combine their information in a way that humans can't, literally combine themselves, we're going to see these different clouds of information try to merge and thereby become even more intelligent.
Are there any particular technological breakthroughs that you think need to happen, or do you think it's actually enough with the type of software and type of hardware we already have?
I think what we have already is enough to understand what will happen. So it's easy to prophesize and predict for the future. Not the exact dates, I never do that, but it's easy today to prophesize and say that, radical intelligence will surround us just about everywhere.
And you don't think we will need like true nanotechnology or special memristors or quantum computing or esoteric stuff like that in order to...
it will all happen very quickly. Quantum computing will happen sooner or later. It's just going to be in surprising ways. It needs a couple of breakthroughs. It's very, very likely that would happen. And then, of course, information flows will just explode in terms of efficiency. And then also along the time axis, things will become much more intelligent. And that's already obvious. I mean, nobody, multiplies anything in your head any longer. You've got machines doing that for you in microseconds. So we do a lot of things already. We are already incorporated with our smartphones and our laptops. I regard human beings today as already being cyborgs because nobody walks out of the door without a smartphone in their hand. And we couldn't even imagine being human without having technology any longer. So we already are. I see human beings today as merged with their smartphones. They're already a machine-human interaction phenomenon.
Do you at all fear the future?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we should have feared the future since we invented the atomic bomb. Because once we had the atomic bomb, we could literally destroy ourselves and the planet in the process in very little time at all. So ever since the Cold War, we've known we're even likely to kill ourselves eventually. And that is still the big risk. And if you look at artificial intelligence or anything like that, that could be a threat against humanity itself. Do I care? Well, sometimes when I look at it, it's just like I would probably be on the side of the cockroaches if the bombs went off because, a species that can't even secure its own survival isn't that intelligent as a whole. It might be intelligent on the inside, but it's incredibly stupid on the outside. So I'm not too worried about that at all. What I find thrilling and really interesting is the capacity for innovation that comes out of these clouds of intelligence merging with each other. And this is, of course, an obvious fact, because if you use a robot at home and you talk to the robot, you realize that robot is connected to like thousands or millions of other robots, and they exchange information with each other all the time. I mean, if one of these robots learns one thing, then all of the robots will know that thing the next day. And that is, of course, way more efficient than the way human beings learn about things. So in many departments, these machines are going to beat the shit out of us humans, at least when it comes to intelligence.
Right, and that's going to force us to become more specialized and so forth.
Maybe. What we do paint forward in the new book, we want to look forward here, is that we're definitely moving towards a society we call a Sensocracy, for good or bad.
What's this?
A Sensocracy is a society where there's sensors absolutely everywhere that measure absolutely everything we do, meaning that no human behavior is out of reach, meaning essentially we'll know absolutely everything about human beings. And the way Sensocracy will work is, for example, that you look at your smartphone today and it locates you on the map and it tells you, okay, your body is here on the planet right now, and around you there are 20 restaurants to choose from. Okay, why are there even 20 restaurants to choose from? Because if this machine has enough data about me, it will know more about me than I know about myself. It only takes 300 data points to know more about a human being than they know about themselves. And Facebook and Google already have billions of data points about every one of us. So they should already now, if they're smart enough, be clever enough to be able to predict what we want. So within my budget, what kind of restaurant would I like to go to tonight? And just by pointing that out, it would give me a suggestion of one restaurant and basically book the table and tell you, go there now, eat in 15 minutes because you should. Tables reserved for you. That's the restaurant you want. And you probably go there and really love the experience, meaning you will not want another 19 suggestions the next time you open the phone. You will expect to constantly find one suggestion, which is really telling you what to do. That means we very, very shortly stop considering, what do I want to do today? Because we'll have machines around us that know that better than we will ever do.
Yeah, and then what will we think about?
That's the problem. It's called Sensocracy. I don't have a solution. I'm just saying it's going to happen. Of course,
I'm personally really bothered or worried about this.
Well, you're old already, Ludvig. If you're 70 years old, you wouldn't say that. So there you go. You get old very quickly when it comes to technology. No, I think Sensocracy will just be too tempting. We cannot avoid it, just like sex robots will absolutely exist. I mean, just for once, you don't even have to go to Tinder. You have to look for a perfect sexual partner. You can just have your perfect sexual partner. And when you're bored with that, the machine will invent something that is imperfect. And suddenly you find that sexier. So machines will very, very quickly tap into our very own desires because people's desires are actually rather banal. So that will happen very early.
Our previous guest, he talked about emancipation and reversion of women's liberation due to sex robots, that men are getting back the upper hand again.
Well, it hits both ways. It means that women will have masculine sex robots if they want to, meaning they don't need men. We're increasingly going to experience that men and women do not need each other as men or women, but they will still be men and women, meaning that I find it very important to return to gender and try to find out what it does mean to be man or a woman, and then put them into the contemporary environment. And then discover that a lot of sort of sexual traits that we used each other for are now gone. But the thing is this, though. When we look at the things that human beings are probably still capable of doing better than machines, where they will still contribute, which is, of course, the big problem. Is there a role for us to contribute at all? Because we will probably freak out if we don't contribute. But let's say there's a role for contribution. And the great thing is that overall, over time, it turns out that the female and male characteristics are different archetypes that contribute differently. So say you've got product leadership, multitasking, communication, women dominate. And if there's not a woman, there's probably a gay guy and not a straight guy. He's hopeless at it. And if you look at vision and strategy, say in a large corporation, the room it's likely to be filled by a lot of men, straight men usually, and the occasional lesbian, because it takes a different mindset. So men and women are good at different things. And the male dominance we had the last 4,000 years in certain cultures, not all, was down to the fact that not patriarchy was too strong, but that matriarchy lost its power and influence. What we're saying in the new book is that we think patriarchy is a good word and should be reinstated into language, and it's a positive word, but it's just matriarchy should be the same. Because we're seeing increasingly in modern societies that women are confused about finally getting a power. They lost thousands of years ago. They're now regaining it. But it means a modern matriarchy has to quickly become aware of what it means to be a grown-up woman and what kind of responsibility a grown-up woman can be expected to take on, and then deliver on those things as well. So we might have a dominance of one gender over the other in the future, but I wouldn't cut out that and say that it's the men dominating, the women are gone, anything like that at all. You know, women will also no longer give birth. 100 years from now, it's definitely be seen as incredibly brutal to make a woman pregnant, give birth to a child, but you can just create a child in the laboratory. Meaning no women have to give, childbirth. And if women don't have to give birth at all, they're suddenly free to do thousands of other things. And they certainly will pursue careers much more fiercely when they turn 30 than they do now. So the last one of that one is not out yet. And that was a guy saying that. Okay, a woman wouldn't have agreed. And there's a good reason why. Not only because she would be offended, but because he simply hasn't seen the full picture. If you look at women and men in groups and you observe them for a long time like I do, then you discover that women have a lot of qualities men don't have. And these qualities are absolutely fundamental for society to work. We just didn't pay them very well in the past, but we needed them. So I am for patriarchy and matriarchy. And I'm for understanding men and women as being very different from one another. And I think the return to gender is also one of my projects in killing postmodernism and bringing back a utopian perspective and a reality check for the internet age. And especially if you go to the world of social media, women and men behave very differently from one another. And to understand why people behave the way they do, you always have to take in the gender aspect.
Right. I think this is super interesting about combining matriarchy and patriarchy. Because if you look at certain Asian countries where they use, the way they think about this in politics is usually in the analogy or the metaphor of the yin and yang symbol.
Yeah, we write a lot about yin and yang in our book. Taoism is perfect for that introduction, yes.
So if you have too much of the female, then it becomes too like hugging circle and just sitting and discussing and nothing gets done.
And you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah. And on the other hand side, if you go too much male, then you have too much competition, cutthroat, laissez-faire,
Well, I would say a system with a lot of men without women tends to go towards tyranny and corruption, and they're intertwined. That becomes the problem then. Even I work with men in men's work and basically just isolate the guys for 3 days from women. It's just it's so relieving to just be with other men around you and trying to redefine what it means to be a man and to define what kind of archetype you are among other men. Like, what do I admire in my brothers and what can they admire me? How do I contribute to the community? How am I different from the other guys? And see, there's an advantage, right? Because in the hunting team, you need the different types of qualities and talents. So that is very rewarding, but it's not like women are gone. It's just you don't think about women those 3 days when you're there. Hardly anybody does, because you know that if I fix my shit and if I become a good brother with my brothers and I become a real man, women are gonna like me. You just know that. So you don't have to focus on what are women gonna think of me for sitting here. Well, they probably think it's a really good investment that you go here, because when you think about a woman you want to live with rather than somebody just flirting with, you love the fact she's strong with other women. If she's strong and powerful among the other women, it means you're guaranteed a strong position too as her boyfriend or husband. So we're looking for hierarchical positions and we're working ourselves towards those and to be rewarded rightly for what we're good at.
And what are some of these archetypes?
Oh, that's a really interesting topic. One way of looking at the archetypes, the basic archetypes, at least the heroic ones, is to look at gods and goddesses in polytheistic religions. And you discover that the gods and the goddesses tend to be very similar. There's a certain pattern that occurs all the time. For example, the phallic leadership, the leadership of the hunting team, is always at least 2 leaders. In soldier religions like Mithraism, there was always a priest and an officer at the top of the hierarchy. And they had to somehow regulate that. So one of them took the symbolic top position, usually the priest. And very often he was castrated or something like that to take that position, because the officer's son was supposed to be the next leader. But the officer and then in return took a lower grade in the hierarchy. And the point essentially, you're providing hierarchy for the young guys to join and say, okay, you're grown-ups, you've gone through rite of passage, now you can join the military and you got your position in here. And you start at grade 1. You work your way upwards towards grade 2 and 3. And men love this. If you're going to have men really thrilled about working on something, you say, here are 2, like Jordan Peterson's book is called 12 Rules, right? That's typically a book directed towards male readers. Right. Men love to have a list of things. You can achieve this. When you achieve this, you go to the next step, And you do in relation to all the other guys. But the trick is this: to have a really good team, you both have to foster people that they can follow these grades and go higher in the hierarchy, but also foster them not to compete. And that's very hard, because if they go into competitive mode, that will start corrupting them. They start playing tricks. I want to go from grade 2 to 3. I don't really deserve it, but I'm going to kick that guy out of the picture so I can take his place and get to grade 3. And that happens within systems very quickly. So as a good leader, you have to be observant of this. And it's usually the priestly role to be observant that somebody's not following the book, meaning that the priest is, for example, also the judge in a game.
Right.
So the judge's role, say in a football game, is very priestly. He's not in the game. He's outside the game, but he knows the rules of the game, and he sees straight through your head when you're trying to fool him, and he blows his pipe when you do, and he's respected. And if you attack him, you're dead.
And this is really interesting, because if we take examples like the Roman Empire, or the Navy SEALs in the United States,
yes,
here we have factors that are super competitive, super hierarchical, but they still enforce a really strong sense of solidarity and teamwork.
Exactly, that's why they work. This is the trick of teamwork in general. It's definitely for teamwork with men. When you have networks of men and women together, it also often works. Women are willing to operate according to this, just as they know the rules. And one way of doing it, introduce women into a male network, is that you have a female judge who's trained to think and understands what she needs to do to behave as the judge. Because the priest doesn't necessarily have to be male. He or she can be female too. The shamanic gene is inherited both by men and women. There are priests both among men and women. And in male networks and in female networks, you have the priestly role definitely defined there. Priestesses as well as priests. So you have to have somebody within the network who's outside of the system, who does not participate in the intrigues, and is not rewarded in any way for being up or lower. And that person therefore becomes credible. And that person then in turn trains younger mentee to take over that role later. The perfect example is the tribe of Israel, the tribes of Israel. So when they entered the Holy Land, the Levites were not given any territory, but they were given the role of being the priest for all the other tribes. So they started traveling across the entire territory, acting as go-betweens. And very often when civilizations fall apart, the priesthood is the one function that keeps, say, an empire or a construction together by having its own language, its own codes, and you're traveling across the territory. It saved Europe during the Middle Ages, for example. It was the church that saved Europe during the Middle Ages. So So this is why people stick to Islam, for example, often radical in the Middle East, because all the other institutions have fallen apart. The only thing that's left is there's still an imam and a mosque in the village, meaning that's the only structure you can trust. You don't have anywhere else to go. And this is why we write a lot about priests and priesthood and shamans and the shamanic gene in the new book, and look at the specific roles the shamans play, because they're going to be incredibly important at this stage. Jordan Peterson is very priestly. Milo Yiannopoulos is a trickster. There's another form of shamanic.
This is not to be confused with someone who tricks people. This is like
exactly a trickster is an archetype. And there's always a trickster god. In Nordic mythology, it was Loki, etc. There's always a trickster god in every religion, and the trickster god often gets drunk and he's foolish and he doesn't behave the way he should. But that's precisely because he's the one who tells the truth when nobody else dares to. And he can never compete with the leading gods. He never competes with the sun god or the rain god, because that is the officer and the priest. But he does remind everybody and pokes fun at everybody and uses satire to expose the ironies and the weaknesses and the corruption within the system.
Yeah, he's like in the world and outside of the world. So he has an objective viewpoint and can come in and point out at people.
Exactly. And you take Milo Yiannopoulos, who I'm a huge fan of his, for example, for his work in America. I know it's controversial, but I don't mind that at all. It's part of his strategy. Milo Yiannopoulos is Greek, Jewish, gay, British, whatever. He can never be the president of the United States. So if you cannot be the top position at all, you castrated yourself from being that position, then you can act freely, and then you're suddenly credible.
How do you find out who you are? And how can you train to be better at who you are?
You find out who you are by sitting down with other people on your own gender and ask them. If you try to imagine who you are for yourself, you might end up in wishful thinking, or your lack of self-confidence might speak to you and you degrade yourself by not finding your position. The trick is this: go to older men if you're a man, or go to older women if you're a woman. That's what we always did in the tribe. The older members of your own gender are probably the most likely to point out what your strengths and weaknesses are and give you a challenge you can live up to. A challenge must never be above your head, because if it's above your expectations, you will fail and lose self-confidence. Your challenge is always be just one step above where you're at. And then when you achieve the challenge, you're ready for the next one. And we need to go back to the idea that the only hierarchy that exists in the original tribe was the one between older and younger. It doesn't necessarily have to be that case today, because it was actually a hierarchy built on knowledge and information. The only place we could store information was in people's heads. So obviously an older person knew more than a younger person. Now when we store information outside of our own bodies, we have an equal access to information. And in a way, 21-year-old can sometimes be smarter than a 68-year-old. But life wisdom is still something that only comes with living for a long time. So you go to people of your own gender and check with them. And if you really think you're getting close to your archetype, go to an older person who is that archetype.
That's great advice.
Yeah, and that's why mentorships are so popular these days. A lot of kids had sort of fucked up relationship with their parents when they grew up. They've been fostered to be infantilized by society, have a desire within them to be grown-ups. And what they very often do, sometimes between the 20 and 25, they go and look for mentorships. I've got a long list of people who want to be my mentees. I can't do them all, but I try to find mentors for them, because I think mentorship is a brilliant way of finding your archetypal role. So you go into the right education and you play into your strengths, and you thereby contribute.
I'm also very happily surprised by young people's that they actually contact me to become their mentor, that they have this drive, that they understand that it's important, but then just as yourself, there isn't enough of us.
Well, a lot of us have kids, and that's the problem. But when you don't have kids can be mentors, and that's what happens. You become a parent anyway. You just become a parent later.
But still, in practice, how will they find these mentors or even their peers, since everybody's locked in front of their own computers alone at home?
Well, that's the place to go. When people tell me we have a huge problem with internet addiction and computer addiction or laptop addiction or whatever in our society, I tell them, well, the only thing we can handle that is by starting another Facebook forum that deals with that addiction. You cannot get out of the online world. It's just like the internet has swallowed us. We live there now. We have to accept that. It's like you were sitting, in the past you were sitting in the city and you moved from the village to the city. And for a long time, we're sitting in cities, romanticizing village life and thinking that one day we'll be able to move back to the village because that's where we were comfortable, just because we're used to it. But again, that's just an old model. And we never did. We just moved into more and more denser, bigger cities to get the advantage of city life, which is that you have access to more information, more knowledge, more people, and you can build stronger networks there you can never do in a village. So the same thing happens today. We just moved from the city now to the online world. That's where we live our lives. And we have to make do and have functionalized there and create those. Meaning mentorships will also be networks, meaning that there'll be networks, hopefully mentors and mentees who try to find each other and then can give advice on how that process works to other people who want to be mentors and mentees.
One difficult thing then, it's to be able to avoid the titty bar, the Twitter, the Facebook, the Instagram, and actually get in on useful networks.
That's next. I'm investing in a couple of projects, both time and energy right now, that are seriously trying to build better algorithms that encourage people to have civilized debates rather than just encourage them to be confrontational and go for the likes. So you can build social networks that are way more intelligent than what I have today. I am very, very frustrated with Facebook myself, but that frustration also means definitely room for somebody to come up with something better. And I think we've only seen the start of social networks. The social networks of the future will be much more intelligent, much more humane, much more understanding of human psychology. And they'll also be looking into plurality and variety, because a network where everybody agrees with everybody will die very quickly.
I think if we can go back a little bit to, you get to this person who can become a mentor, and then you have the courage to go there and ask the right questions and actually put yourself out there. But what are some of the right questions? What should one ask?
Well, the first thing the mentor probably realizes if they're the right mentor for you or not. You might project your fantasy about finding a mentor in a certain person. That person is then very likely to be the first one to say that, no, I'm not going to be your mentor. I'm the wrong person for you. You're looking in the wrong direction. You're looking at the wrong archetype. This is not my expertise, knowledge. You have to find somebody else. And either they hopefully help you find that other person they should have, or they just tell you, no, we don't have that relationship. And it's something you have to accept. You know, if you accept that somebody else is wiser than you because they have more life experience, they're probably going to be right about what they say. So, you have to go on the high. The governments are not going to help us with the mentorship programs. It's something that has to develop between willing mentors and searching mentees. But I think it's a healthy thing that it happens. I think it's healthy that it's happened on a large scale. And it's a sign of the times that a lot of young people are tired of being infantilized. The biology within them, the physiology speaks volumes to them. Like, I'm a damn grown-up person. I'm tired of being treated as an infantile constantly. I want to be treated as a grown-up, and I want to be in an environment where I'm accepted as a grown-up.
Do you think Burning Man could be a good place to look for mentors or for communities that could fit you?
Yes, but for a surprising reason. What I like about the burner world is that it's one of the few places left where people from different generations actually meet. A huge problem we have in society today is that we focus so much on throwing men and women together in the same places all the time. And Sweden is really a huge social experiment in forcing men and women to be together constantly, meaning we've sexualized absolutely everything we do. And now we deal with that. That's why Me Too was huge in Sweden. The good thing with Me Too is that it finally exposes the fact that we have a lot of problems with the fact that men and women are constantly together in our society. Historically, they weren't. What we lost, though, is, and this is a tremendous loss, but we lost the historical connection between generations. We used to live in households where the older and the very old and the younger and the very young were in the same space and took responsibility for each other. And of course, in that space, it was a lot easier to be 3 years old when you were 3 years old. It was easier to be a proper 20-year-old when you were 20. It was also easier to be contributing 69-year-old when you were 69. So I believe the burner world sets an example is that it fosters different generations to meet in a playful milieu. And that is really, really good because it's lacking. And I think a lot of the popularity, I'm 57, and when I go to burn, I'm incredibly appreciated by 23-year-olds out there because they've hardly seen a 57-year-old anywhere they are. And they really need it.
I get the impression that in the burner world, people are also experimenting with psychedelics, both microdosing and macrodosing.
Oh, yes.
And I think that psychedelics could be even better than alcohol at opening up people to truly meet.
Oh, absolutely better than alcohol, because alcohol is crap, okay? I like red wine, but not to get drunk. I like because of the taste. No, psychedelics is becoming a huge underground movement. And again, this is the red religion versus the blue church. The popularity of psychedelics and the acceptance of psychedelics in culture comes from red religion people and from the young, against the old and against the blue church establishment. And I find it incredibly interesting to see how this question is going to mature in politics and in law and in medicine over the next 10 or 15 years, because there's definitely a huge underground movement understanding the potential of psychedelics. to me, a lot of people are focused on psychedelics as possible treatments for pathologies. And of course, because psychedelics are popular, they do change us when we take them, meaning that a lot of psychopathological problems we have today should be treated with psychedelics rather than with like registered drugs or patented drugs, right? So that's an area that's interesting. Personally, I'm interested in psychedelics because it opens people up to having a spiritual experience. And say you're a radical urban atheist and you live in a big city and you're not interested in traditional religion and you say you don't believe in it. Well, I perfectly understand that. So you go through a psychedelic experience. It's undeniably spiritual. You cannot describe it any other way. And you've discovered you're perfectly capable of having a spiritual life. And you tie that spiritual life to psychedelics, and very often not only to the psychedelic experience itself, but to the memory of it. You've had an ecstatic experience, and very often you realize, oh, okay, I'm in this experience right now. It's quite beautiful. I really enjoy it, but I don't want to stay here. And the next Monday, you go back to your sober life, you go back to work, and suddenly going to work on a Monday is different from what it was 2 weeks ago. So the psychic experience has an effect on you afterwards. And memorizing a spiritual experience to have an effect on you in everyday life is what going to church was all about. So for me, psychedelics interesting. It's my take on Syntheism. If I would say I contribute two things to Syntheism right now, the Synthesis movement. One of them is the spirituality to start with men and women defining themselves as men and women again, because we have to have that. We have to get that right to orientate ourselves in society. And so I believe in equality but difference. Quality and difference. And the other aspect of it is that psychedelics is the shortest route possible to spirituality today. And unless you want to go through a lot of yoga and meditation and cold baths or whatever, which takes a lot of effort and is very demanding of you, maybe you can start with psychedelics and you can get that spiritual experience much faster.
Which one should you start with? So you don't have to go through...
See, I can't believe this. If I was sitting in television or radio or newspaper, I could never say that. This is a damn podcast, so I can talk about it. Again, this is Red Religion beating the shit out of Blue Church. We're doing it right now. Psychedelics, I would not recommend anything in general for people. I would have to sit down with the person. A lot of people take all kinds of strange pills today and have a lot of diagnoses. And that's why I cannot make a general recommendation of where you get started, because psychedelics is strong stuff. And it's demanding and challenging. And... if you're going to do it properly, it really is. So if you're going to do it, you actually have to sit down with somebody who's very experienced, preferably somebody who's very experienced and done psychedelics for a long time without being an addict. Okay? That's usually a good advisor. That's a good mentor for you when it comes to the drugs. But I have to say that when it comes to psychedelic experiences, if you want to become a spiritual being, you haven't found another way of doing it, this is the way to go.
I think the real challenge is to make it last and make that, okay, so you have the spiritual experience and then you go back to work and it's different. And then after a week, it's gone and you're back into your habituated mode of like just not paying attention. You haven't sustained that interesting feeling.
Then you've had a psychedelic experience that wasn't spiritual. The psychedelic experience that's spiritual does affect you. You will notice that you see things differently. You see the world from several perspectives rather than just one. You listen better to other people. You also speak more clearly. You find it easier to have access to truth and speak truth and be daring. It does have these effects on you. If it doesn't, it's not spiritual. It's just taking drugs, and that's banal. So working with shamans, I work with a lot of shamans from different cultures and always come back to the same things. Two tricks about shamanism. The first is that it's not during the taking of the psychedelic that interesting shit happens. That's just the door opener. Always in shamanic traditions, you have a full day afterwards called the day of integration. And it's during integration that the really interesting stuff happens. You're opened up, you're naked to your surroundings, you're much more receptive, you're also receptive to being changed. And that's what happens. And when people report back 6 months later, they don't talk about the drug experience itself. They talk about the integration, how it affected them. And the other thing is that if you do go into some kind of ecstatic state, or it could be a really horrible state too, that can happen. It's called an anti-event or an event. But if you go into an event state or an anti-event state on psychedelics, it's the memory of that experience that stays with you. If you share an ecstatic experience with somebody, you can just look into that person's eyes the rest of your life. You instantly know each other on a deep level. Yeah, or if you have an anti-event experience, you had a really bad experience, well, then you can have empathy with people who go through struggle in their life suddenly. You might have had a good life all your life and suddenly went through tough experience on drugs. Well, it can teach you, okay, life can be this tough. For some people, it's been this tough all along. So please show some empathy and compassion with those people, because now you're with them. You've been there yourself. So you're visiting a certain state. You're not going to stay there. You learn from that experience. That is what psychedelic spiritual experience is all about.
Do you think that if you go to, is it Peru, for an ayahuascan ritual?
Yes, I've been to Peru many times.
And if they accept you for the ritual, I kind of assume that you can be not accepted as well.
Yes.
So if you're
screened,
if you're screened and you come through, is that safe?
Most of the time, well, nobody ever dies from or goes, psychotic on ayahuasca itself. But you have to follow the instructions. And the tragedy of our times is that, say, a lot of young kids come from Europe and North America. They go to northern Peru and they take cocaine and drink ayahuasca. And they usually don't tell the shaman. And that's a lethal combination. You have to learn about drugs. And I was instrumental in starting the Center for Drugs Research in Sweden, which is like the British Drug Policy Alliance. And that network now has almost 10,000 members in Sweden. And it was essentially the kids who came to people like me and said, we want to know about these things. And I said, okay, you need to know about everything about the different molecules involved. And you also need to know everything about the molecules interact with each other. And you need to know how all these molecules interact with anything else in your bloodstream. So there's a lot of knowledge here. It's like a map you have to pull out there. And there are risks involved with all these things. And when it comes to ayahuasca, if you work with a professional shaman, they will ask you beforehand if you do this or this and this, and they'll put you on a specific diet before you drink the ayahuasca so that what you drink will not interfere, so you get the desired effect. Still, even if you do that, there's no guarantee you're going to have a wonderful experience. Ayahuasca is very, very tricky, but that's why what I recommend for people who are very interested is to go to Peru, stay with the shamans for a while, and go through a cycle, meaning you drink, say, 5 ayahuasca ceremonies in, say, 8 days. You have some integration in between, but you drink several ceremonies over several days, and you finally get the whole palette. It's like, oh, okay, this can be boring, this can be exciting. This can be both boring and exciting, or this can be really bad and tough, But it teaches you things about yourself and about life, and you return in a sort of neutral state. You definitely return with a sense of expansion.
So is the reason you can't combine cocaine with ayahuasca because of the beta blockers?
It's a chemical interaction between cocaine and ayahuasca is definitely lethally dangerous. Again, there are the combinations of popular drugs that people at least hopefully know they should never combine because those combinations are lethal. I mean, if you want to take GHB, if you take GHB and mix it with alcohol, it's usually lethal. It's like really dangerous, right? So there are a lot of popular drugs out there people hopefully know they cannot mix or should not mix, right? And it's the desired effect. Sometimes if you mix amphetamines and alcohol, it's pointless. Because amphetamine speeds you up and alcohol slows you down. You end up being the same person you were before you started drinking and taking drugs. You've taken tons of drugs, you put your body under enormous pressure, and you have no effect. It's useless. So you need to learn these things. And all I recommend kids today is that your parents have probably lied to you your entire lives. The medical establishment have lied to you their entire lives. Political establishment definitely lied to you their entire lives, meaning you cannot trust anybody. So you can only trust, again, it's about the nodes and about finding phallic truth. You can only trust friends who go on the same search mission that you do, and then look for older people who are experienced and credible, and then you can get the truth.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting because what you're getting here, if you take it to its razor's edge, what it's really about is thinking more for yourself, but you have to expand that bottleneck, which is the mind of thinking. So that takes effort. It takes mental effort to think. It takes mental efforts to process information. It's difficult to cross-reference different information channels, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
And that requires a discipline and a practice. And that's, I think, the fundamental bottleneck to improve upon to become better and smarter.
Well, and to begin with, you have to step out of infantilization and become an adult to do all those things.
Yeah.
What you guys are talking about here in your great podcast is essentially what I would say requires today even a foundation that we call adultification, meaning you have to accept and always struggle to stay an adult at all times, because only then can you do these things you said, because everything is right. But that very platform does not exist for a lot of people today.
So a psycho for all 20-year-olds to get going in life.
What?
So if we prescribe a Peruvian psycho for all people about to become adults as a rite of passage, then we'll be fine.
Well, if you go to Peru, you have rites of passages on ayahuasca, but it's usually a one-night event. And the cycles are for people who go through passages later in life. Okay. So the rite of passage usually celebration one night. You drink with the shaman, and then you recognize the grown-up because you could drink the ayahuasca and take it, right? So that's more the rite of passage. But it is used. Ayahuasca is widely used for rites of passages in the Peruvian and Colombian jungles, and it has an interesting side effect. If you're a very cocky young boy or girl and you think very highly of yourself, it cuts you down to size. That experience humbles you, and that's exactly what you want in rite of passage. You want the recognition that, yeah, you're a grown up, we believe in you, you're one of us now. But you also want the big ego involved to be cut down to proper size. Like, yeah, but there's a lot of shit you don't know yet. The fact you recognize you're a grown up and you're one of us doesn't mean that you're the expert on anything at all. You need to learn.
It's almost like a hero's journey in 24 hours.
Yes, it is. It is.
I have another question on this, and there is more and more research being started on MDMA and LSD these days, and it seems everybody's more or less agree that it's physically safe to take these things. And in Silicon Valley, there is more and more reports of executives and founders microdosing on LSD, and now we also have the final piece of the puzzle with marijuana being legalized in more and more places. Do you think that psychedelics is en route to become legalized as well?
I think so. I think cannabis and psychedelics will sooner or later be legalized, but for surprising reasons again. We're going to have such an enormous problem with opiate abuse. America already does. There's 66,000 people a year now dying in America, dying young from opiate abuse because we have cheap, new high-tech opiates that are 50 or 100 times more potent than heroin. They're synthetically made, often in China or Canada, sent into the United States. And they're used by young, frustrated people, especially in the Midwest, who don't see any purpose in life any longer. And it's an epidemic of huge proportions. And I cannot see why it would stop at America. I would definitely expect the opiate epidemic to hit Europe in a big way in the next few years. And it's just the fact that we need to prioritize here. If you're going to go after drug abuse, we better go after the abusive drugs and not the non-abusive drugs. There's never been addiction to psychedelica. Never. No psychedelics create addictions. Just doesn't happen. They don't work that way. You can be addicted to amphetamines. You can definitely be addicted to cocaine. So you can be addicted to some of these serotonin or dopamine enhancers. But if you work on your self-confidence, you probably are not. But you can be addicted to these things, right? And there's also strong antidepressants like ketamine. The only people who do get addicted to ketamine, but do it, a lot. If you get addicted to ketamine, you're probably really addicted to it. But it's actually because it's a powerful antidepressant. So you should need to treat yourself either with ketamine in a controlled way, in a controlled study, or get antidepressants to work for you.
Right.
So you have these drugs out there. It's better to legalize them to begin with because they're not abusive in themselves. Legalization also means you get control over these markets. You can start to tax them. You get rid of a large part of the black economy. So you get a lot of unwanted things out of it. You could probably finally get peace in Central America to begin with. And a lot of people would really appreciate legalization for that reason. But you still will have some synthetic opiates. They're not necessarily best operated by being criminalized, but you definitely have to prioritize our governmental or our resources onto the treatment of these abuses because opiates are going to be around for a long time and it's going to get worse.
I think this really goes back to what you were saying before about sucking on the tit, because these people, they're really they're kind of spectators. They're not engaged in life. They don't have anything that they're really burning about or happy about or building up themselves in some constructive way.
Yes, that's when you become an addict. But the problem with addiction is that the stronger addictive molecules, they don't even let you choose any longer whether you suck that tit or not. The tit is just unavoidable. Life is so unbearable without it. So, and that's the cruelty of opiates. Opiates are incredibly, incredibly demanding of you that way. And I don't want to be the size of naive about it. I think a scientific, factual relationship to drugs is needed. And it's very, very unfortunate that psychedelics and narcotics have been intermixed at all. They should never have been in the same category. Psychedelics is just different from narcotics as alcohol is from narcotics. Yeah, psychedelics is its own group and should never have been criminalized in the first place.
Yeah, I agree with you. But going back to these tit suckers, I think if you have these people in a downward spiral who are just slowly crashing to the bottom, but they're spinning in a very, very slow manner, maybe 5 cycles a minute. Just imagine that. And then when they start taking this, it speeds up like anabolics until 100 cycles a minute until they crash and just destroy themselves.
Well, if you die from opiate abuse, it's probably because an accident happened. But those accidents are very likely because it's criminalized.
Right.
So you can take heroin your entire life every day and still live a reasonably healthy life and live until you're 85 years old. But if you take a synthetic, incredibly potent opiate, it's very, very hard to dose it correctly. And if it criminal activity, you bought it from somebody who probably wouldn't even know what the exact concentration is, meaning you're gambling with your own life every time you take it, and suddenly overdose and then you die. So death from opiate abuse in America is almost exclusively overdosing from people who didn't know what they were taking, who didn't know the strength of it, and they underrated the strength of the substance they took. And this is, again, a reason why even opiates maybe should be legalized. But my point is that the priorities of the police and the priorities of social workers and the priorities of society as a whole, churches and everything, should be on opiate abuse, and they should just leave psychedelics completely out of the picture. We don't have a problem with psychedelic abuse in our society, and we don't have a problem with loads of people running around being, psychic freaks because they took psychedelics. It doesn't exist. It's just a myth. So the priority when it comes to drugs should be legalize everything, put it inside the white market, get out of the black economy, and get the tax system involved, etc. Make it like any other product, with the exception of opiates. That has to be special status because we know they're highly addictive.
Do you think there can be an edge to being spiritual in society? If you have spiritual experiences or not, is that good or bad for you in terms of finding your place in the network?
Definitely good for you, but so are relationships. The two tricks for people, you talk about happiness, it's kind of a banal question. You look at people who are happy and fine with themselves and contribute richly to society and without fuss. They usually have really good relationships around them, good marriage or other good relationships around them. But work on your relationships, and make sure they're your type of relationship. Some people like to be alone a lot. Well, then maybe you should work on relationship where you're alone together with other people who like to be alone. Because at the end of the day, we are social creatures. So your social sphere is incredibly important. And next after that comes spiritual experience. And they're often tied together because spiritual experience is often shared. Right? They become spiritual because they shared and because they connect people with each other. The word religion literally means that which connects people. That's what the word means. That's why I think it's a beautiful word. It should be retaken. It's nothing to do with believing in God. That's theism. Religion, religare in French, Latin, means that which connects people. And that's why I'm a synthist. And that's why I get involved with social movements, because I think people need to get involved with each other.
If we go back to what we were talking about before with the dystopias and the future coming, bad situations of the future. Have you ever watched that TV series Black Mirror by Charlie Brooker?
Yes.
What do you think about it?
Well, Black Mirror is a brilliant TV series. The problem with it is that it's so to the point with contemporary dilemmas that some of the episodes got dated after only 2 years. But it's still worth it. I think that was consciously a decision when it was designed. I think it's brilliant. It apparently didn't matter whether it was produced in Britain or America. It's just a great team to do it. Great scripts. And anything I watch, if I watch TV these days, I watched it on my computer, of course, like everybody else. I watch these series on laptop, and I love them when they got a good script. Yes, and Black Mirror has really good British script.
It's a really interesting concept, very original concept, I think.
Yeah.
But what do you think are some really serious dystopic dangers of the future?
What is interesting with Black Mirror is that some of the threats it portrays are things that are just around the corner. If you do science fiction today, you don't do science fiction about the world in 40 years' time. You do science fiction about the world as it is almost today, or is somewhere else. So the future is confronting us much quicker now than it used to. It's just around the corner constantly, and that's a new thing. We've never had this kind of exponential technological development before in this that we do have right now. So that makes our time different from previous periods. And I find that interesting. It's a great time to write philosophy. It's a great time to write good scripts and good drama, because there's so much going on that is interesting. And it's constantly the interaction between human beings and each other and technology that creates these dramas.
So have you been putting time into writing a movie like this? Or?
No. I'm a philosopher.
What about documentaries and so forth?
No, I don't want to spread out my talent too many things, because what happens is when you start doing lots of different things is that you're not very brilliant at any of them. You become mediocre at everything because you're not really focusing on what's your real talent. And I have a very philosophical brain. I should write philosophy. It's just that easy because few people can do what I do. I'm in the right place. I'm doing the right thing. It's very rewarding.
How do you draw the distinction? Or obviously this is a self-knowledge thing, but it's one of these you could call it a meta skill almost. Knowing what you're good at and drawing the line very firmly. Like, I'm not going to do it unless it's above this bar. And you have to erect that bar yourself through the years by learning more about yourself?
Well, I worked as a record producer and songwriter successfully so until 5 years ago, and I gave up at the top of my success. It's like, why did you give up then? Well, it's just like I was doing philosophy too. I was working on my 4th book at the time and doing research and realized, okay, I'm spreading out my talent. I'm not really brilliant at any of these 2 things, or at least not according to my own capacity. So I decided to give up on the music because I'd already done it for 25 years. And I remember the morning when I decided that, I opened Spotify, and I think Spotify just passed 18 million tracks available on Spotify. And I just had this thought briefly, the world doesn't need another pop song. And that's what I would write today if I went to the studio. It already has 18 million tracks to choose from. And they're probably pretty good. And a lot of the stuff out there is certainly better than anything I would write today. So, but the world needs contemporary philosophy. It really needs deep thought that understands the age we live in and can point towards the future. And I'm good at that. And I'm in a position where I'm allowed to do that. So I should pursue that.
I think that's a really powerful choice because to most people in Sweden, at least, you are really most famous for being a music star and for having put together these 4 really popular groups very consistently.
Oh, but you would expect that. I mean, a lot of philosophers were not known as philosophers when they lived. They were known as public intellectuals, or, they wrote drama or whatever they did. That was very, very common. Nietzsche, for example, was not recognized as a philosopher until the 1920s, which was like 25 years after he died, because he was seen as a poet, a wild poet before that. I don't really care how people perceive me. They can perceive me any way they like. I do what I do, and at the end of the day, eventually, if you do something for a long time, you will probably recognize as doing exactly that. But if people have other perceptions of me, I can't change that. They're allowed to have whatever perception they like. I don't care, to be honest about it.
Yeah. But it's interesting because going back, I don't know how old you were, but you got a degree from Stockholm Business School, right? Stockholm School of Economics.
Yes, I started the Stockholm School of Economics in the 1980s, and I finished economic geography at the university. And after that, I took a break and went into music full time. And when I sold my first record company in 1998, I went back to the Stockholm School of Economics to do research. So that's my academic history.
How long is the time gap there from getting the degree, taking the break, and then selling the record?
Almost 10 years. Selling the record company, yeah. But I got out of the music industry for the first time. I kept writing songs, and then suddenly I ran a management. I had a smaller operation running while I was writing my first book. And I kept that running for many years and still enjoyed it a lot and had hit singles or hit records and, and things like that. But the more I started working with other businesses than the music industry and saw that digitalization wasn't just hitting the music industry. It hit the music industry probably before any other industry was hit by it. So again, I was lucky in the sense that I had a knowledge that other businesses wanted access to. Like, how do you deal with this revolution? So I work with digitalization in all kinds of companies today. It can be a huge German insurance company. It can be a car parts company. It can be a fashion company. I work with all kinds of corporations in implementation of digital strategies for these companies. And that's what I do on every level. It's like, how do we manufacture products or services differently? How do we communicate differently? Every aspect of it. Maybe we need to recreate our whole brand because we need a new fetish and a new vision. So I work with all these strategies with companies. And having been in so many businesses now, it's just that I don't want to stay in the music industry. Just one business among many. So the only reason I stayed there was because of my love of songwriting. But I'm very little involved in the music industry these days.
But you also knew a lot about, I don't know how to put it because I'm not a master at music myself, but you knew how it works and you knew the industry and you knew how to put together these.
I learned.
Yeah.
I had mentors.
Yeah.
I learned quickly, but also had mentors who guided me. And they were very good at pointing out when I thought something was obvious, they would say, no, that's just predictable. What do you mean? This will be highly successful if I do it. Yeah, but you will not grow doing that. Yeah. This is what you can do right now and be successful instantly. But at the end of the day, it's not going to make you grow. So why don't you do something more underground or weird or experiment more before you release something? And that was an incredibly valuable lesson for me from my creativity to nurture. It's like, it's better to be number 23 in the charts with an innovative record than to be number 1 with a boring record.
I think I just got this funny idea. Do you know the group Odd Wolfgang Future?
I've heard about them and seen some kind of video on YouTube. Yeah.
So the reason I think this is interesting right now is because that group it's a really weird rap group and they came out of nowhere, and it's like you can almost explain their success by partly like how they put together that group in some way. I don't really get it, but I can see that it would have to do with that. And then also what you're saying about the whole Netocracy paradigm, like these people are building their own platform, they're putting it out, people liked it. and this was a real shock when it happened. There'd never been a style like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happened in the music industry before, but then we had the problem. We had a press department, the record company that had to convince the newspaper or radio station to write about a new band that we believed in. We didn't have a problem finding talent that we believed in. If you work at a record company, you're probably good at finding really unique and original talent because you're bored with everything else. But previously, we had to go through old media. These days, you don't. You put it out there online. And actually, record companies are hardly ever involved when you go from, say, 0 to 100,000 or something. But as soon as you have 100,000 hits or 100,000 streams or something, you get a volume to something. Then you need to take this act from 100,000 to 10 million. That's what record companies are good at. That's their expertise today. So they take you into the next league when you presented something that works. And if you look at online media today, everything else we do online today is very similar. Like, okay, you take something to a certain extent on your own, then maybe with some networks you created with similar people who do similar things, you take it next stage, then you need a media company to take it to the last stage, like to really exploit it. But that's how you work in the online world too.
So you find a star and then you amplify him or her. That's basically it.
Yeah, becoming a star is something you have to do on your own these days.
Yeah, and I think this is a really interesting parallel to investing. Because if you take angel investing, then these people are really specializing in finding different parameters that make for a company that they can scale up. And in this case, it's almost like the record label or the music master person finds these talents according to some criteria and finds the star, and then he kind of plugs him in.
Yeah, exactly.
Another comment on this is that it's not really your success is not based on exactly your competency or your skills, but it's your network that's interesting.
Well, it is both. You can't be a successful record producer and songwriter unless you have talent for writing great songs.
Yeah, you have to have some talent.
There's a lot of people that try writing songs and are just crap at it. The vast majority of people that do are. I was lucky enough to have that talent, and I was lucky enough to be able to write an interesting text. So write is something I could always do. Then I could also make music, something I discovered like in my early 20s, very late. But I had those two talents. There's a lot of things I'm not very talented at, like cleaning a house, right? So the things that other people do around me, and I appreciate them for doing, especially those things where they contribute where I couldn't contribute well. So that's how I see myself.
But it's very different to write a deeply philosophical text compared to writing a pop hit song, isn't it?
Not necessarily. This is the thing. Creative expression is one thing. It's a libidinal thing. And libido tends to be one thing. If you look at it as one thing rather than divided, you understand it much better. So I wanted to go into theater in my teens, and I went to drama school in the United States, and I came back to Sweden and had my first full play on a stage when I was 19. I was like a theater wunderkind. Discovered already the next year I didn't want to do theater because there was no challenge involved in it. So I realized I could write, I could portray human beings well, I could put it into social context. I had all those talents, I had the self-confidence to do it, but it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And I remember when I had my boys' room when I was 7 years old, I had one wall covered with rock stars and one wall covered with philosophers. They were my idols and they all had beards. So I became those two things. I didn't become an actor. I didn't become a dramaturgist. I didn't become a drama writer. I became first a rock star, and then I became a philosopher. And honestly, already when I was 7 years old, those two things attracted me the most because they obviously involved also a challenge. They were creative expressions, and the creative expression is neutral. If you have this urge in you, you have to express yourself creatively. You can become an artist or a musician or an actor or anything else you'd like for that matter, but it has to be involved creative expression. Once you find a medium, you then have that medium. So for me to go to a studio in the morning and drink a cup of coffee and write a song, or to sit down in my office with my laptop and work on a chapter in a book, isn't really that different. It's almost identical.
Right, but you have achieved all this self-knowledge when it comes to this, and it's easy for you now maybe to say that I know my strength and I know what to focus on. This is what I'm good at, this is what I'm less good at, so I'm just going to do what I'm good at. But it's clear now that you have gained this experience over a long period of time, and you've experimented with many different media.
Absolutely, yes, I have. And I took advice from mentors. I made my own decisions and lived by them, and I discovered that some things I was not very good at and tended to be very time-consuming. They were not easy to do. And I discovered there were other people who could do them better. But then I don't have to do them again. What I try to do again is I think of myself in an evolutionary way, that If I do something and I do it well, I can do it again and improve on it even more.
I have this success theory for the 21st century, you can almost say. And I think there are like 3 factors. You have your strength, you have your weakness, and then you have your preferred communication medium. And if you take these 3 and you multiply them, then the result is not like 1 + 1 + 1 is 3. It's like 1 + 1 + 1 becomes 100.
Well, especially if you meet somebody else who thinks the same way and you start collaborating, then it really kicks in.
But do you agree with this? Do you think it's true?
Well, it's quite simple. It's logical. Why not see it that way? It's just like, with the exception that something that was your strength 2 years ago might not be your strength 2 years later. And that's where technological change comes in. And that's where increased awareness comes in. You get competition all of a sudden. Or technology has changed and suddenly what you were good at has become redundant. So yes, that's correct. And again, if you look at yourself as a kind of archetype, it becomes even more natural what you should prioritize and what you do.
This comes back to the strength and weakness part.
Well, and there's also the timeline, meaning that you will do certain things when you're 30, other things when you're 40, and other things when you're 50. So, for example, for me to sit down and work on a book for 4 years took a lot of patience, a lot of hard work. I was probably not capable of doing that when I was 23, thankfully, because I wasn't a very good thinker yet when I was 23. When I was 39, I was ready to write my first book, it debuted, and I was ready to take on that kind of project with that kind of effort demanded of me. And after that succeeded, I had the self-confidence to write a second book and then a third book, etc. So, and I was old enough to be able to do that. So you're good at certain things when you're 20, you might not be good at the same things when you're 40 years old. And when it comes to looking cool and hip and go out on the stage and be a rock star, that's a lot harder when you're 55 than it was when you were 25.
Do you believe in the theory that success for especially artists peaks before age 30? Or do you believe it?
No, not at all. It's just rubbish. Success, I'm not interested in success. I'm interested in success only in the sense that you do something good at, you connect with somebody, you're lucky enough for that to have an effect. There's a lot of luck involved in success. Enormous amounts of luck involved. There's no guarantee you're going to succeed at something if you do something. You might be able to do something. You obviously have the talent for it. And right the day before you're going to release your book or record, somebody else comes out with a book or record with exactly the same theme and it's better than yours. And suddenly you're dead. You're nobody. There's so much luck involved in these things that all my recommendations are try and try again. Some people have their breaks when they're 70. Some people have their breaks when they're 19. Somebody have the breaks when they're young and they can't live with those breaks and they can't maintain it. And some people break when they're young and they stay stars forever. It's just, you don't know. It's just that sitting at a record company or a book publishing company, knowing from 1 year to the next is going to work the next year is almost impossible because there's so many factors involved and there's also certain unpredictability involved with human beings that you have to take into account.
Okay, that's a really good answer. And I think, how about if you change that from the word success into creative output and originality or creative output? Like a lot of take physicists or mathematicians or philosophers had some of their most radical ideas when they were maybe before 30.
Yes, some of them do, some of them did not. Some of them didn't know they had that capacity until they were older. Well, at the end of the day, I don't have much of an opinion of it. You can just take out Wikipedia and read at least, 20 Wikipedia entries on different famous philosophers, or 20 Wikipedia entries on rock stars, or 20 Wikipedia entries on scientists, and you'll discover they have very, very different lives. It's just, as soon as there's a rule, then it's probably a good idea to try to break it, with the exception of something that, for example, demands a certain nature, like physical sports. It's very, very hard to win an Olympic gold medal in swimming when you're 45. It's a lot easier when you're 21, even if you have the same talent. So there's certain things that they require experience for you to be successful. Then you have to be successful later in life. And there are other things that require, for example, physical strength in a way that you lose it when you get older. So it depends on what you put your mind to. I was lucky in the sense that if I was a rock star, became a philosopher, is that you're at your peak as a rock star somewhere between 20 and 40, and you're at your peak as a philosopher somewhere between 40 and 70. So being 57 years old, I would be a very, very old rock star. Not as old as Mick Jagger or Madonna, but almost. But 57 years old, I'm still very young as a philosopher. So different disciplines with different conditions.
If we go into reading and education, like you're very widely read. And I want to wonder, how many books do you read these days? Maybe if you have some sort of average number per year you could guess at.
Oh, I read a lot of books. I need to be learned. You can't be a philosopher unless you're really well versed and well learned, and you have to go into depth as well. I can consume books very, very quickly. I can read through a book in no time at all. I can speed read, no problems at all. But I don't do that with books that really are important to my work. So when I go into the mode where I'm really going to develop a philosophy, I go into philosophers who've been there before, especially my opponents. They're the best people to read, to force yourself to think and discover your own weaknesses and blind spots. But okay, say you have a 4-year period for a research project, meaning there's a lot of studies reading going on at the beginning. There's usually a second period of incorporating those ideas and start building a groundwork for your philosophy. Then comes more reading. And this process goes on until you go into writing mode, and that's usually the last year.
Okay. Are there many books that you have reread more than once?
There's several books I've reread because they were that good that I could discover more depth in them later in life. So the big giants of philosophy like Hegel and Nietzsche are definitely worth rereading all the time.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because this is really at the peak of my learning strategy, the way that I learn best. I try to take a very large number of books or essays, and then I try to find the good ones, and then I want to go through them over as I mature.
Yeah. And sometimes you discover a few titles on your own because obscure titles can be rich in ideas, just difficult for other people to comprehend. Some of my favorite philosophers are almost incomprehensible for the vast majority of readers. I'm a huge fan of Alfred North Whitehead, but I accept completely that it's so damn difficult to get through that the vast majority of people, they get stuck on the first page and give up. It's just that hard, but it's because he's so advanced and he's that good. So philosophy is not pop literature. It's not meant to be read by loads of people. If you have a philosophy bestseller, you can be damn sure that book is not a proper philosophy book, because philosophy is hardly ever accessible to a lot of people. It's that advanced.
Right. I think I've read Alfred North Whitehead's Wikipedia, and I know a little bit, and I read the wiki quotes and so forth. That's also what I do. When I find an interesting person, I read through all that.
But Wikipedia can very often be wrong, especially when you go into really sophisticated, advanced matters. The Wikipedia entries are often very sloppy and generalizing. But this is better than nothing. Wikipedia is better than any encyclopedia ever was to begin with, So yes, Wikipedia is a good start. But I've also met a lot of young people who think that, I've done the Wikipedia readings. I've spent years reading Wikipedia, jump from one thing to the next. And you have no depth in your analysis whatsoever. You don't see your weak spots at all. And you think you're smart because you can name drop a lot of things. You cannot even differentiate between the level and the meta level and the meta level of something, which is like in philosophical thinking, that's the primary condition. It's just like if you attack somebody, he's an opponent to me, you attack them, and you attack them for all the wrong reasons. Your arguments are right, but you attack them for all the wrong reasons. You're going into the marginal aspect of that personality or the works of that philosopher, whatever, whereas you completely miss out on the substance. You automatically disqualified yourself from all future conversation. You're an idiot. It's just like you don't have philosophical talent, because philosophical talent is about daring, but it's also about seeing, where does this fit in? What does this argument really deal with? What field of philosophy is this discussion of? So if you don't get that, you'll be lost very, very quickly.
Right. It's kind of the genius of putting it into context.
Absolutely.
And so Alfred North Whitehead is a pretty difficult guy, like you said. But one idea that he's pretty famous for is the idea that the big thing of the 19th century was to create the whole scientific method of improving upon ideas. What were some other things?
It wasn't only his idea. I think there's a widely held belief about science and the history of science, yes.
Yeah, but that's one of the things that he's known for.
He's also known for being a brilliant mathematician together with Bertrand Russell before he decided to become a philosopher. But although I love mathematics, I'm more interested in his later philosophical work.
And what's this?
Well, Process and Reality is a book of absolute brilliance. It is one of the most important and one of the best philosophy books of the 20th century. It is tough, but it is really, really good. It was instrumental for us in writing the Syntheism book. We couldn't have written the Syntheism book without that book. And in that book, we are Whiteheadians. Jan Söderqvist and I really follow the pattern from Alfred North Whitehead forward by using process philosophy as the basis for religion and theology.
All right, that was it. If you found it valuable, don't forget to check out part 1, which was episode 6 of Future Skills. Not to mention, keep an eye open for Bard and Söderqvist's book Digital Libido this fall. Please rate us on iTunes, since it helps others find the show. Finally, I'd like to thank Alexander Martin, who edits and shapes our sound.